All right, John Middlekauff, the former NFL scout hired by Andy Reid, is already in New Orleans. I am leaving in the morning as we are doing this in the late afternoon on Tuesday, as I've overcome my very dramatic bailing on the show. We've already talked about that, and that's boring. Okay, this game comes down to a couple of things for me. So let's just do one Eagles Chiefs rant. Then we got a bunch of stuff to talk about. Is that Mahomes is 7 for 7. I mean, this is the greatest that have ever done this. Breeze and Brady were about 50%. Mahomes is 7 for 7 on game tying / game winning drives in the playoffs. Okay, 7 for 7. Vic Fangio, the Eagles defensive coordinator, is 0 for 8 against Patrick Mahomes. So we know that coaching and quarterbacking largely decides these games. The Niners outplayed and had a better roster against the Chiefs years ago, and Garoppolo missed on a deep ball. I mean, we know that Patrick Mahomes, the Eagles had them in big trouble a couple years ago, and Mahomes came up with a huge scramble that was the difference in the game. We know this is going to be a coach, a Spags, Fangio, Reid, Mahomes, Hurts, Nick Sirianni game, and that's why I favor Kansas City. You know, it's interesting. I think a lot of fans think most quarterbacks are great in crisis. We know Lamar's not. We know early Peyton Manning wasn't. We know Elway was, but went a long time before he actually won the very end of his career. When you watch Mahomes as a former scout, what makes him? I mean, a lot of guys move. A lot of guys are accurate. I mean, I could say that about Favre and Rodgers. He's perfect in these game-tying, game-winning playoff drives. As a scout, if you just watched him and you didn't know who he was playing for, like, what's his secret sauce?
I was actually, there was an NFL player on my flight and we were delayed a long time and we were talking about him and he was talking about the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. And when you blitz him in these big games, he kills you. I mean, we know in the regular season, but blitz is, think who he goes against every day in practice for the last 6, 7 years. The best blitzing defensive coordinator in the history of the league. So he's very calm that way. Well, when you get pressure with just the front four, when they played DeMeco Ryans and the Houston Texans, and they have a good pass rush, they got two really good defensive ends. He can handle crisis when it's just four coming, and his offensive line, Colin, it's not exactly like Tony Baselli and Larry Allen were blocking for him this year.
Right.
So they were winning games all season long, playing in pretty chaotic situations. They were not an explosive offense. They could not really protect him, but he can protect himself. And I don't know if it goes back to, I had a front row seat for many years in the Bay Area of Clay and Steph. Those guys kind of grew up around it, and they were just a little more calmness to them with the lights being the brightest because they had been that way since they were 5, 6 years old going to these arenas. And you have to wonder with Patrick Mahomes, I saw a picture, A-Rod holding him, when Patrick was like 5 years old. Like Patrick's kind of used to these. And listen, baseball when he was growing up was a pretty big deal. So
Yes.
his dad, a lot of people, when you bring up Mahomes to older people, they know him. But yeah, that reliever. So
Yeah.
I think there's just a natural calmness. And then, he's playing for, I've been saying it for a while, the chubby, I used to call him the chubby Bill Walsh, but have you seen Coach Reid? He's eating healthy. He's slimmed down.
You know what? You brought up something that's really interesting for our listeners and our viewers to this is that I told somebody a couple of years ago, I said, man, this Brock Bowers kid, here's why I know he's going to be great. Because every day at Georgia practice, he's going up against first-round corners and safeties. Every day is an NFL practice at Georgia. That's why you have to question. I mean, Khalil Mack's been great out of Buffalo, but when Trey Lance comes out of a smaller school, or a player that comes out of a smaller university like the Genty, the running back for Boise State, your takeaway is, okay, maybe he has one big game against a good school, but what happens when you're on the road for a quarterback or you're on the road and playing in front of 80,000 against NFL people? So Brock Bowers, by the time he got to the NFL, I mean, most of the defenses aren't as good as Georgia was his last year in college. And he was eating, I mean, so even as a freshman out of Napa High School, I'm watching him. I'm like, this kid's just dominant in the SEC. Who you go against? Well, you mentioned something about Mahomes going up against Spags, and I think it's a great point. Don't we both probably acknowledge now that the reason Brady was so efficient and sharp against mixed coverages is because Belichick had practice? Sorry to interrupt this great video, but please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you. Now back to the video. I mean, just think about that. When you go, when you're a great high school football player, and a lot of these great high school football players, they transfer. Like in LA, there's like 4 really well-known high schools, like DeMatha, right? These kind of great schools. Well, because you're dominating lesser competition. So then you go to practice and you go to DeMatha or something, one of these top schools, maybe it's Hoover in Alabama. Well, now you're competing every day against Division I players when you're 17, 18, 19. So you're ready to play at Georgia, Alabama, LSU when you come on as a freshman. And I think this is the unspoken part about Mahomes that you touched on. He has spags every day experimenting. And I think it sharpens his knife.
Think about when Brady really popped. I think Peyton Manning, he's compared to a lot. Their paths were they weren't similar at all. I mean, Peyton kind of by his second year was hitting the ground running, and he carried that franchise for a long period of time. Brady, for the first 4 or 5 years, every day in practice, Mike Vrabel, Teddy Bruschi, Rodney Harrison, Asante Samuel, right? I mean, think of all the good, Richard Seymour. I mean, that's what he really honed his skills from 2001 to 2006. And then he really popped '07 on when they brought it, and he became Peyton Manning. I can carry the offense and carry the franchise. So it definitely matters. Why are physical teams physical? Well, because why could Alabama always run it down people's throat? Well, they were going up against the best defense. Same with Kirby Smart. Why are Jim Harbaugh's offenses always able to run the ball and always tough? Well, look at his defenses. I remember going to his practices against Vic Fangio and thinking, well, this offense, with Alex and Kaepernick, they had some issues throwing the ball, but they always could run the ball. Why? Because in practice, to run it on Patrick Willis, Navarro Bowman, Justin Smith, Navarro Bowman, and Alden Smith, and all these guys, I mean, it's hard to get a yard. So the games are easy. And I can't even imagine the last couple of years of practice for Patrick Mahomes. Just can you imagine as over the next, like one thing's pretty clear about Andy Reid, he will acquire better players moving forward. And they feel like they like Xavier Worthy a lot. Well, don't be shocked if, Travis is going to retire. They'll add another tight end. They'll add a running back. He will have a second iteration of skill guys. And he will be on a whole nother level mentally. Because physically, I mean, he's 30 years old. He's in the prime of his physical life. So mentally, watch out. You're getting, and that's what you've got. Peyton Manning, Tom Brady. And that's been the difference of him and Josh and Lamar. I mean, you've been watching football longer than me, but Josh and Lamar are 2 of the more pure talents in the history of the league, are they not?
Yeah, no question.
So, I mean, they've just run into a guy and a coaching staff that's kind of mastered their craft.
Yeah, I mean, think about this. Mahomes didn't get more athletic. He didn't get a stronger arm. What has Mahomes done over the last 2 years? He's gotten much more efficient, much greater on like third down. Why? Well, because he doesn't have the escape route. He doesn't have Zeke. He doesn't have Tyreek Hill. So Mahomes, as this Chiefs defense has been drafted and developed and has become a monster the last 2 to 3 years, to practices. I mean, when he came into the league, he had Tyreek Hill, and the Chiefs' defenses were okay. Yeah. Now they're great. And so I think practice matters.